Good morning, folks. My name is Kelsey Berkfeld. I'm the Director of Advocates for Ohio's Future. Thank you so much for joining us on this Friday morning. We are really excited to hear from a couple of members from one of Advocates for Ohio's Future partner organizations to discuss some of the tax cuts, proposals, deductions, and credits that are already floating around in the General Assembly, either through the budget bill or through independent legislation. We will let folks come in from that waiting room for just a moment before we begin. Just a couple of housekeeping details before we get started. We are recording this webinar. It will be available on our website later this afternoon in full. We'll also send it around to everyone who registered for that webinar. If you have to hop off early, or if you want to revisit a part of the conversation, we would love for you to do that. We will also be sending around the slides to all of our registrants, and they will be posted on our website as well. So as well as all of our other webinars that we've done in our budget series, please feel free to revisit parts of those conversations. We are happy to bring you such great content. And I know I do that all the time if I want to revisit the expertise of some of our members. So friends, we will go ahead and get started. Once again, I'm Kelsey Berkfeld, and I'm joined by my colleague, Sarah Hudasek. We make up the team at Advocates for Ohio's Future. We are, again, a nonpartisan nonprofit made up of over 500 state and local organizations concerned in health and human services. We have providers, we have policy folks, we have researchers, again, united to make sure that families and really all Ohioans have what they need to live healthy lives and quality communities. So we are excited to bring lots of different health and human services sectors together to identify priorities and make sure that we are speaking really from the same script as we work to improve the well-being of all Ohioans. All right, and I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker from Policy Matters Ohio. Will Petrik is an executive committee member of AOF, so he's on our leadership team. We're glad to have him, and we're excited to hear what Will has to say on his policy expertise. He has lots of experience in the state budget and a couple of the different provisions that we're going to talk to you about today. So Will, when you're ready, please take it away.
Thank you, Kelsey. And yeah, just want to say thank you so much, Advocates for Ohio's Future, for hosting this important conversation. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. Again, my name is Will Petrik. I'm the project director with Policy Matters Ohio. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Guillermo Bervejillo. He's a state policy fellow with Policy Matters. Our organization is a nonprofit, nonpartisan budget and policy research institute. And our mission is to create a more vibrant, equitable, prosperous, and inclusive Ohio. And yeah, we're happy to be a part of the Advocates for Ohio's Future Coalition. We're aligned with the mission and goals. And really, we're here because we believe that all Ohioans deserve to live with economic security, stability, and basic human dignity. And you can go to the next slide. So yeah, our main goals for today are that, we hope that everyone here who's listening in will have a better understanding of a few things. One, we want to provide some historical context and basically talk about a brief history of tax cuts for the wealthy over the last 2 decades in Ohio. We also will, my colleague Guillermo will be talking more about some of the current proposals at the State House, both House Bill 1, but also the child tax deduction proposal in the state budget. And, we want to, make sure everyone has a clear understanding of, what the real threats are, what this could mean for health and human services, and what this could mean for the people that you all serve, people who are paid low wages. And then finally, we also want to highlight some real solutions and talk about some budget and policy solutions and ways that we can change the tax code to support our goals. Governor DeWine has talked about being wanting Ohio to be the best state to live, work, and raise a family. And so we want to highlight some solutions toward that end. And also solutions that can make sure that we continue to make these critical investments in health and human services. So I think the plan will be that we'll kind of present, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions and discussion. So, feel free throughout if you do have questions to put them in the Q&A or the chat. But with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague Guichet to again kind of share some more of the historical context about how we got to where we are today.
Thank you, Will. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history. As you may or may not know, there's been a trend in the Ohio politics for the past couple decades that's been characterized by a flattening of income taxes, a reduction of income taxes, but also some major changes in the way that we tax businesses, the way that we and the rate at which we tax things like gas and cigarettes and all these kinds of things. There's a bit of confusion with this stuff because when they sold the income tax cuts, they told us that it would affect everybody, that the lowest income people would also see a large tax cuts. But when we start putting these things together, we see that there's a bigger story to be told. What you're seeing in front of you is a graph that I made with data from the Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy. It's a nonprofit think tank in DC that has a sophisticated model of state and local taxation. What they do is they add all the tax changes. This graph has all the tax changes since 2005, since the big changes in 2005. Corporate taxes, use taxes, sales taxes, excise taxes, income taxes, all forms of taxes. And the big takeaway is what you see right there. The bottom 60% of Ohio, on average, has seen an increase in taxes since 2005 relative to 2005, whereas the top 40% of Ohio has seen a tax reduction. But I think the goal with this graph was really to point out that the top 1% of Ohio is paying $51,000 less in taxes today than they were in 2005, right? And $164 might not seem like a lot on average for the lowest 20%, but when you're living with less than $30,000 of income annually, that's a week or two of groceries. Makes a huge difference. Whereas that $50,000 for 1%, these are people who are making over $500,000 a year. So they're able to buy themselves perhaps a new luxury car every year. But continuing this thing, this story, I want to make sure that we kind of inoculate against this idea that we've been doing this in part because government has just been growing and growing, and we're spending left and right. In the next slide, you'll see that. Oh, sorry, I skipped. This is another fundamental. No, go ahead. Go to the next slide. This is another fundamental thing that I wanted to make sure I nail in this. We misunderstand when we add all these things together. We have to realize that the wealthiest people in Ohio pay less income as a share of pay less taxes as a share of their income than the poorest people in Ohio do. So the lowest 20% of Ohio, these figures are a little bit out of date. We're going to get some new figures later this year, but the basic truth still is there. In fact, it's probably more unequal now. What you see is that the lowest 20% of Ohio, on average, pays 12% of their income in taxes, and this is even though they pay near zero in income taxes. But they pay a larger share of their income in use taxes, excise taxes, sales taxes, all these things. Whereas the richest Ohioans, who can only buy so many gallons of milk, can only drive so many miles in their car and use so many gallons of gas, they use less and less. They pay less and less use taxes and sales taxes, and even though they're paying a somewhat higher rate in income taxes, overall they're paying less taxes as a share of their income. So again, every time you hear somebody say that the richest people in Ohio are paying the most, yes, they pay more in gross numbers, but they pay less as a share of their income. Now, the next slide is what I was talking about before. we have this idea, there's this idea that's been sold to us over and over again that government is growing, that it's overinflated, all these things. I think anybody on this call probably knows that this isn't the truth because we're dealing with those services, those people who are trying to ensure have like the basics of living wage or basic services and housing and food and all these things, and we know that there isn't enough to spare. Part of the issue is that there's this little magic thing called adjusting for inflation, where we actually keep constant the value of money over time. When we do that, and that's the green line, you'll see that this is just since 2009, but you could pull this much further back. When you do that, you see that government spending and government revenues have pretty much stayed even. A little bit of fluctuation, but not significant growth. But if you don't adjust for inflation, then you have that gray dotted line. It looks like it's growing. It looks like it's going crazy. And those are the figures that they use when they want to sell that story. The truth is nowhere near that. So again, just inviting you and to reach out to me if you want to do the calculation, but inviting you to do these basic calculations whenever you're looking at a line item at a budget or whatever, because it's probably the case that with the inflation that we've seen in the past couple of years, if you see a number that isn't growing significantly, it's mean that it's actually decreasing in real numbers. Next slide. So what's in the budget? The budget is continuing basically the cycle of tax cuts for the rich and kind of inefficient loopholes and tax expenditures. We have the child tax deduction that we're going to talk about here in more detail. We have a sales tax exemption for infant care items, which is well-intentioned, but I think it's important to remember with these types of sales tax exemptions that the people who are going to benefit most are the people who spend the most money. So if you are somebody who's buying things used, who's getting things, borrowing things from family, friends, who is buying the cheapest brand product and not off-brand products and all this kind of stuff, this is benefiting you significantly less than if you're an upper middle class household who's buying all the top brand names things and buying everything new. I'm not going to go too deep into the questions of low-income housing and single-family housing. We have in Ohio a desperate need for more housing stock. So we want to encourage that kind of development. I think in the case of these things, there's an argument to be made that it is the benefits of these tax credits are going towards, again, upper middle class developers, the owners of these companies, and much less to the low-income people who we want to house, to ensure housing for. Overall, these are adding to the list of 154 tax expenditures, which is about $11 billion a year, that we spend in many forms of tax giveaways to some people who deserve it, but a lot of people who don't. We were talking not too long ago. Will was talking with the Aging Association, with the Ohio Disability Association, just talking about the amount of money that's been lost through these kinds of tax loopholes and tax cuts, and what a difference it could make to people living with disabilities who need more accessibility services, who want to be able to live in a non-institutionalized setting. And this is the kind of money that could make a huge impact for the types of top issues that we're all concerned about in this call. So next slide, this is the child tax deduction. I just wanted to make this point extra clear. The child tax deduction, the way that it's designed, it doesn't reduce your tax liability immediately. It reduces your taxable income. So what that does is it does two things. First, it benefits you a relatively small amount. As you can see on this graph, if you have a child and you're about middle income, you are getting $70 roughly per child. If you are in those households that are earning less than $30,000, a lot of the households that we work with in the AOF, you benefit absolutely nothing from this bill, from this tax deduction. On the other hand, the richer you are, you benefit more and more per child. But what I wanted to point out too is that, the sloppy design of this policy is such that there's actually a very small range of people who are getting a significant benefit from it, more than $400 of it, because of the sloppy design and the way that the tax cliff affects the people right in that little range. So it's not that these people need it more or less than the people right above or right below them, but because of the sloppy design of the policy, it actually benefits them significantly more than everybody else. Next slide. The last thing I wanted to say about the child tax deduction is that it is an expenditure of over $130 million a year, and I think that we could all come up with good ways, better, more targeted ways to use that money to benefit the people who need it most. The next thing I want to talk about is flat taxes. The idea of flat taxes are floating around Columbus, and they've been floating around for a while, but now they're catching a little bit of pace. And I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware about some of the myths that kind of like float around with it. For one, there's this idea that flat taxes are, benefiting everybody. The truth is, when you look at this is Institute of Taxation Economic Policy data, what they did is they looked at all current states with flat taxes and all current states without flat taxes with graduated state incomes. And what you see is that what you see in the blue is kind of what we have now, although could probably have something better, but is that the lowest income households actually don't pay taxes. The top income households pay more income taxes. This is income taxes. Remember from our previous slide that if you include all taxes, it's actually flipped around, right? But this is just income taxes. On the other hand, states with flat income taxes, you can see what happens there. The beneficiaries are the top 1%, the next 4%, the top richest wealthy people. On the other hand, on the bottom end of the scale, people are actually paying more taxes on average than they do in graduated income taxes. So I'll talk a little bit more about the proposal, the House Bill 1. But this is crucial. This is really important for us to understand, is that flat taxes aren't necessarily more simple. They aren't necessarily more fair. In fact, they're not fair. And the people who benefit the most are the wealthy taxpayers. Now, this comes at a huge cost, and it's the kind of cost that we might not fully feel in this very moment because of some surplus monies that are floating around thanks to the past year. But as the sponsor of House Bill 1 kept talking about, trying to help out local government authorities because he didn't want to pull the stool out from under them immediately. He wanted to ease the fall. But when you pull out the stool, it doesn't matter if you do it now or in a couple of years, we're bound to fall. All right, next slide. So, this slide was supposed to be a little bit different, but basically the House Bill 1 is what I want to talk about. Ignore this slide. House Bill 1 is as the name says, the top priority in the House right now. It's a bill sponsored by Representative Matthews, and who's from Lebanon. And basically, it does four things. It institutes a flat tax, which we've been talking about, and I'm going to talk about more. It repeals the 10% rollback, which is a tax credit that all property owners receive, where they pay 10% less property taxes, and it's covered by the state. Now, the cost of that is $1.3 billion. $1.3 billion. So by repealing that, that means that the state is no longer picking up that 10% tab, and that's going directly to property owners as a property tax increase. Now, you'd be surprised to hear that that the current legislators have any interest in increasing taxes. So what they did is they did a third thing, which was reduce the property tax assessment rate. which is supposed to reduce your property tax rate. The thing is, I'll actually, sure, stay there. So the thing is that ploy didn't fully work out because of the way that the Ohio Constitution is set up, and they were trying to make that $1.3 billion shifted over onto local governments, but they weren't able to fully do that because of the way that the Ohio Constitution is set up. So that $1.3 billion is basically paid for by reducing local taxation, local taxing authorities, reducing their revenue by about $540 million, and making up for it with tax increases to certain people, property tax increases. Now, this is a big mess. And as you guys know who are working with levies, part of the issue is where does the 10% rollback fall on levies that were passed before 2013 or after 2013? And then even within those levies, we're talking about the three types of millage, basically, right? Inside millage, fixed sum levies, and outside millage that is not fixed sum, right? Fixed rate, outside fixed rate millage. And now, just to complicate it a little bit further, and you don't have to remember all this, but even within the outside fixed rate levies, there are three different situations which determine how much the local taxing authorities are hurt and how much property taxes have to increase. I'm not going to go into all the detail of that, although if you want to, we can. The point is, it's a big mess, and it is going to hurt it's going to hurt the local taxing authorities significantly, and it's going to keep increasing that local tax. The reduction in revenues for local taxing authorities is going to keep increasing as the years go on. But if you want to remember one set of numbers, it's that that $538 million, which is going to hurt local taxing authorities immediately, right? Just from the property tax assessment changes, and the fact that there's $1.3 billion in property taxes that residents are going to have to pay. The last aspect of HB1 is some state aid for certain property owners, in the form of expanded homestead exemption and some other tweaks. Now, all this is happening in the context of a flat income tax, which I want to highlight because we don't know where House Bill 1 is going to go, what's going to happen with it, but the flat tax is being talked about in many different forms, and I think it's crucial that we understand the impact of it. The flat tax that's proposed in House Bill 1, this is the graph that you see in front of you. If you're a family making less than about $30,000, you gain nothing from this. If you are making between $30,000 and about $50,000, you gain less than $3 from this. And then from there, it starts going up, as you see in the graph right here. An individual who makes $500,000 a year will get more than $5,000 in tax savings. Now, and that's a huge amount for most low-income families. But for somebody who's making $500,000, it's not very much, and it's not going to make the difference for somebody who's deciding whether or not to live in Ohio. Next slide. This is the breakdown again of this same thing. The top on the bottom on the left here, you see that 0% average change for the lowest income people in Ohio. On the far right, you see that on average $11,000 for the richest 1% in tax cuts, right? And we could spend some more time thinking about what's in this, but I think I've probably gone over time. So let's go to the next slide. So now Will take over.
Thanks, Guiche. So yeah, Guiche basically outlined more information both about the child tax deduction and about House Bill 1 and the threat of basically more tax cuts for the wealthy. I'm going to briefly talk about a few additional immediate threats, but then kind of shift into talking about solutions. So, if you've been on other AOF calls, you've certainly heard about the cliff of the end of the public health emergency. We know that things are about to get worse for a lot of families. And even before that, we estimate that 464,000 Ohio kids lived in poverty in 2021. And we know that ongoing inflation is making it harder for parents and harder for adults to just afford basic necessities. Things like rent and gas and childcare and heating your home. And again, Advocates for Ohio's Future has really been out in the lead talking about the public health emergency. But we know that an estimated 673,000 households in Ohio are going to have fewer resources to keep food on the table. That's the number of households that have been receiving SNAP emergency allotments. So they're getting a second SNAP payment. They're going to now on average be receiving $170 less. We also have heard from the Ohio Department of Medicaid that 220,000 Ohioans they estimate will be disenrolled from Medicaid. So again, things are about to get worse for people with low wages. And before going into kind of the budget and policy solutions, broadly, I think the thing that's important to know is economic insecurity and poverty costs us all. When kids grow up living in deep poverty, that stunts their ability to learn and grow. It limits their life's trajectory compared to kids in more economically secure households. Kids who grow up in poverty are more likely to underperform in school, experience health challenges, and also interact with the criminal legal system as adults. And, again, on the flip side, when families have financial stability, kids get better grades in school, they're healthier, they earn more during their lifetime. So, ultimately, again, like a big part of Advocates for Ohio's Future is really thinking about, all the basic needs that kids and adults and families have. And so, we know when we prioritize the health and well-being and the economic security of people, kids do better and all of us benefit. So, I'm going to talk about the Thriving Families Tax Credit, but first wanted to highlight a little bit of information about the impact of the federal expanded child tax credit. So this was a part of the American Rescue Plan. It was a one-year expansion of the child tax credit. And, this had an immediate impact on millions of families across the country. This was something that temporarily provided monthly direct payments to families with kids under age 18. And it went to over 1.2 million households in Ohio, and an estimated 2.1 million children benefited from this. And, there's a lot of research out there that talks about the impact. Families were able to make ends meet. They were able to cover basic necessities. We saw basically 70% of parents, according to the Brookings Institute, said that it helped them better manage rising prices. Child poverty also fell to a record low. It was 5.2% in 2021, again, in large part as a result of the federal expanded child tax credit. I outlined at the beginning, things are about to get worse for a lot of families. Families also lost that expansion of the child tax credit and an expansion of the earned income tax credit that was a temporary federal boost for families. And, basically, I want to talk about a solution that we have been talking about with lawmakers and with partners. It's called the Thriving Families Tax Credit, and it would, again, help families pay for the basics. It would provide more opportunities for families of color and families in Appalachia. You can go to the next slide. So in November, we released a report really making the case for the Thriving Families Tax Credit. Again, it's a refundable state child tax credit. And we estimate, and again, this was in partnership and based on analysis from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, that this would help nearly 986,000 families in Ohio who make less than $85,000 each year. And it would benefit an estimated 1.8 million kids under the age of 18. The average tax refund would be roughly $1,000 a year. And the design, the proposed design is an annual credit, again, for families making less than $85,000. It would be $1,000 per child annually, age 0 to 5. And a $500 refundable tax credit for kids age 6 to 17. And we also designed a phase out. So this would be a fully refundable, full amount for families and tax filers that have $65,000 in annual income. And then there's a phase out between $65,000 and $85,000 to prevent a benefits cliff. And one of the reasons why we really wanted to move resources to those families at or below 65,000 and at or below 85,000 is, Guillermo talked about the whole history of the Great Tax Shift and how, the wealthiest 1% are basically taking home over $50,000 on average each year in tax giveaways. Whereas, again, those households making at or below 65,000 are actually paying more in state and local taxes. And so this would actually put more money in the pockets of those families. So next slide. I also talked about the fact that this would provide more opportunities for families, specifically Black and Brown families and families in Appalachia. We estimate that 77% of Black children in Ohio would benefit and their families would be eligible. In this slide, this shows basically that more than 55% of families in Appalachian counties would benefit and would be eligible. So this basically shows the percentage of families that make at or below 75,000. And this is actually a screenshot of an interactive map. So I can, after I'm done talking, kind of share the link to the map. But if you all are interested in learning more about, what would the impact be on families in your county? Basically, this map is interactive and you can hover over your county to see an estimated percentage of families and an estimated number of families who would be eligible and who would benefit. So, and again, these estimates are based on county by county income data. For families, it's from the US Census Bureau American Community Survey. Next slide, please. So this is another, Guillermo talked about the child tax deduction that's proposed, that's in the governor's budget, House Bill 33. And then this other proposal, House Bill 1, the kind of proposed flat tax that's really a tax giveaway and a tax cut for the wealthiest Ohioans. This is a slide that really shows, a comparison between the child tax deduction, House Bill 1, and the Thriving Families Tax Credit, and looks at 3 different families. So if you're a family making $200,000 a year, and it's 2 parents with 2 kids under 5, from the child tax deduction, you'll see $200. back in savings at the end of the year. And from the flat tax, that family would see close to $1,400 as a tax savings. Meanwhile, if you look at a family with the same family but making $25,000, they're not going to see a dime from the child tax deduction proposal. They're not going to see any savings from House Bill 1, but from the Thriving Families Tax Credit, that family would be eligible for a $2,000 tax credit. And again, going to support that family to help them put food on the table, pay for childcare. We also looked at again, the same family, but at the median income in the state of Ohio, so $62,000. Again, that family would be eligible for $2,000 from the Thriving Families Tax Credit, and would basically only see about an estimated $38 from the flat tax proposal, and from the child tax deduction about $161. So again, this outlines how we can change the tax code to make it more fair and more equitable, and actually move resources to where they're needed most. Next slide, please. The other thing that I wanted to highlight, so we worked with Data for Progress, and they basically conducted a survey. It had over 1,300, or excuse me, it was 1,387 likely voters. So over 1,300 likely voters was the survey sample. And basically they found 77% of voters support enacting a state child tax credit in Ohio. And this support was broad and shared across voters, so voters in urban, suburban, and rural areas. The next slide also shows that there's also broad support for increasing taxes on the wealthiest. So again, what we're seeing with House Bill 1 is a tax cut for the wealthiest and a redistribution of resources to the most wealthy, whereas the regular voters and the people, are actually wanting to see more taxes on the rich. So 71% of likely voters support new tax rates on households earning more than $250,000 and more than $500,000. And again, those resources could go to support critical health and human services. They could go to making childcare more affordable, to helping people put food on the table, to help people afford stable housing or children's services or senior services. So the next slide, please. Just wanted to close with, we're in the thick of the state budget debate now. And, we've already heard from lawmakers that they're hearing from people across the state that they're concerned about House Bill 1, that they're concerned about what that will mean for their own property tax rates, what that will mean for parks, for libraries, for senior service levies, for children's service levies, for the Adam H boards and the mental health and addiction services that are critical in the community. So, one, we hope folks on this call and encourage people on this call to call your lawmaker and speak out against House Bill 1, speak out against more tax cuts for the wealthy, and highlight your concern about how this could potentially impact local levies and real people in your community. And the other thing that we're asking y'all to do is, we support, again, changing the tax code, but let's do it in a targeted way that's really supporting the families and kids and adults that need it most. So, our solution to that is really supporting a Thriving Families Tax Credit in the budget. We've worked and we are working with Representative Weinstein and Representative McNally on some legislation and on an amendment in the budget. And so asking you all to support that Thriving Families Tax Credit amendment and also to support, basically replacing the child tax deduction with the Thriving Families Tax Credit. We also had a really positive conversation with state senators on both sides of the aisle about, interest in a refundable earned income tax credit, and also repealing the LLC loophole. That was one of the tax loopholes that, basically we're spending $1 billion annually, and we haven't seen the economic benefits that lawmakers at least initially talked about. So again, we just want to thank everyone so much for joining, and we're really excited to work with you, work with Advocates for Ohio's Future, and with the General Assembly, again, to change the tax code to support the economic security and stability and dignity of all Ohioans. And I think with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Kelsey. Oh, yeah, the other thing, please reach out to us. If you're interested in, potentially speaking out in opposition to House Bill 1, or you want to work with us to build support among the legislature for refundable tax credits like the Thriving Families Tax Credit or the EITC, please get in touch with us. We'd love to work with you to provide support, to provide research and talking points. We're building the team to really try to advance those goals long term. And I think the next slide also has contact information for Policy Matters. So you can follow us on Twitter at @PolicyMattersOH. We're also on Facebook as well.
Thank you so much, Will and Guiche. We do have a couple questions in the Q&A that we'd love to share with you. Happy to kind of moderate and would invite both of you to answer when you feel you can. So the first is a bit of a two-parter. This is talking about the flat income tax proposal. Do other states have a flat income tax, or would Ohio be the first to do this? Second part of this is, why does the House want to have a flat income tax now if the end goal is to eliminate the income tax altogether?
Yes, so the answer is that, yeah, there are, I believe, 8 states that have flat taxes right now. They are actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I wish I had the list right here, but several of them are close to us. Illinois, for example, I'm pretty sure. Massachusetts had a flat tax till recently. Kentucky has a flat tax. In many of these cases, the flat taxes are actually higher than the 2.75% that the House Bill 1 is proposing. But it is true. There is a trend towards trying to do away with the income tax altogether. And Representative Marin, for one, had made a concerted effort in that direction. I think the feeling is that this is a partial step in that direction. So, they'll pass this and continue to move towards that, because they know that if they cause the pain slowly, maybe they'll be able to have people weather it, even though, the pain will be the same, no matter if they do it all at once or in the course of a decade.
Excellent, thank you for that. And then shifting a little bit in our gears to the family or child tax credit. So a couple questions regarding this. The first would be, have other states enacted a state family tax credit? Does Ohio currently have one, or would this be creating one for the first time?
So thank you so much for that question. So several states have passed state child tax credits, and the Thriving Families Tax Credit is essentially modeled off of some of those other state child tax credits. So New Jersey, actually the Republican governor of Montana introduced in the budget a state child tax credit. So this is something that, after the expansion of the federal child tax credit, there's been a lot of interest among leaders and advocates on both sides of the aisle for what states can and should be doing. And so, yes, there are efforts underway in several states And I think our federal partner ITEP actually has like a map of all the different states that have enacted a state child tax credit and refundable earned income tax credits. To the question of, what has been done in the state of Ohio. So a few general assemblies ago, probably about a decade ago, the state of Ohio enacted the state's first earned income tax credit. And again, this is something that we know is something that makes a difference in terms of reducing child and family poverty. It puts more money in the pockets of workers and families. And, basically our analysis and the analysis from the Institute for Taxation and Economic Policy found that because the credit as is non-refundable, it isn't having the impact that it really could. So we're hoping to have a 10% refundable option, and that would reach Ohioans that earn less than $63,000 annually. And I think one other thing to note is, in one of my conversations with actually Representative Skindell, he flagged that the way that we've made progress on both getting an earned income tax credit and making some progress on the earned income tax credit is when the General Assembly has done what they're doing now, right? Basically proposing tax cuts that mostly benefit the wealthy and don't do anything for folks with low wages and for families with either low or no wages. And they've been hearing from the public, from the media, you're not actually doing anything for a whole bunch of families. And again, it's happening with House Bill 1. Households that make less than $30,000 aren't going to see any benefit. And so that has been when the legislature has been pressured to actually make some progress. And so, having that Thriving Families Tax Credit solution, the refundable earned income tax credit, we want that to be part of the public conversation when they are hopefully getting a lot of heat, hearing hey, this actually isn't doing anything for the majority of families, and particularly for low-income families.
A brief follow-up to that, Will or Guichet, what is a non-refundable tax credit?
Absolutely. So non-refundable tax credit is a tax credit that reduces your tax liability. So how much you owe, how much taxes you owe. But once your tax liability hits zero, it can't reduce it below that. So what that means is that if you owe taxes, you get a benefit from a tax credit. If you don't owe taxes because you're a low-income family or because whatever the situation may be, then you don't benefit from a non-refundable tax credit. That means that only people who already have a tax liability benefit from non-refundable tax credits, whereas refundable tax credits are more progressive. They benefit a larger population because you can benefit from it even if you don't have a tax liability.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Guichet said. So prior to the American Rescue Plan expansion of the federal child tax credit, basically 27 million kids nationally and 950,000 children in Ohio either received a partial amount of the federal child tax credit or nothing at all because it's non-refundable. And so it's structured in a way that, again, excludes a lot of families with low wages. So typically, if you make lower wages, rather than having, when you file your taxes to owe the federal government $100, you might actually get a savings. You might get a return. But if that's the case, you don't get a credit if it's non-refundable. If it is refundable, regardless of income, regardless of, whether you get a return or owe anything on your federal income taxes, everyone is included. And so making a credit refundable is both an equity issue it includes more families with low wages, but it also includes more Black and brown families, more families from Appalachia who are paid low wages. So the refundability aspect is really important in terms of fairness and inclusion.
Excellent. The questions keep rolling in. Thanks for being willing to answer a few here at the end. So next question, what impact does the proposals to flatten the income tax have on school districts and school funding?
Sure. The immediate figure of House Bill 1 on schools is $298 million per fiscal year. So that's the immediate impact from just the property tax changes. However, there are nearly $2 billion of income tax changes that come with a flat tax, right? And that is a little bit more complicated. What proportion of that comes down to the education, to the schools, the education is not quite clear. And there's additional complications because what happens as the local taxes get reduced because of the property tax changes, then the state funding formula will come in and cover a little bit of that cost in certain places. So basically what this is all doing is increasing the state share of school funding, which of course, as we all know, was what was deemed unconstitutional in 1997 and has been, been a continued problem for the state of Ohio. So immediately that 300 million, but also those cuts are going to have to come from somewhere, even if they use current surplus funding to cover the costs of the tax cut bill. Eventually they're going to have to cut, and schools will probably be up there, in addition to all the other kinds of services that people on this call are interested in. Should I respond to that other question?
Sure.
Yep. So the question is, if flat tax passes, will Ohio have enough funding to implement the child tax credit, or is it a real threat to Ohio's ability to implement that new credit? And the answer is of course, if we have a $2 billion revenue shortfall, I should say this specifically. Fiscal year 24, the revenue shortfall from the income tax change would be $2.6 billion. Then the next year it would be 1.85 or 1.9 billion dollars, and then it would increase from there because of one-time costs. So we're talking about $2 billion less in funding per year. So yes, that would be, it would make it a lot more difficult to do the things that we've been arguing are necessary for the people of Ohio. That said, the way that we've designed, that we've talked about the Thriving Families Tax Credit, and the way that we've talked about it with senators such as Senator Lewis Blessing, we've tried to connect it, and this is thanks to Will's work, into all of y'all's work, is we've tried to connect it to the LLC loophole, which is also known as the business income deduction, which is a $1 billion tax expenditure, a tax deduction for basically for accounting acrobatics. They sell it as small business entrepreneurship and stuff, but only about 14% of pass-through entities who are benefited by this actually hire anybody other than the owner of the entity. So we've been trying to argue that if you repeal the $1 billion for the business income deduction, the LLC loophole, then you would have money for a significant, generous Thriving Families tax credit, and it would be, revenue neutral.
So we had another question come in, and this is concerning really the impact on households if House Bill 1 does pass, that flat tax passes. Would households pay more on those local levies? I know we talked a little bit earlier in a different meeting about the threat of those levies passing, because it would have to be increased amounts, right, to continue them moving forward. So what would be the impact, really kind of bottom line, on households if House Bill 1 does pass?
Yeah. Households would see a more than $600 million property tax increase from the property elements of this. and that includes the state aid. So that's fundamental. So also, because of the repeal of the 10% rollback, that means that all levies will be more expensive for the taxpayers in the future. So yes, it will make all local levies that much harder to pass in the future, 10% more expensive, right? The benefit of the flat tax is it's the only people who benefit from the flat tax are the wealthiest Ohioans. I mean, there are people who will have, like I said, if you're a family of 50,000 with $50,000 in income per year, you see less than $3 of tax savings from the flat tax, but you might see tax increases from the property tax changes, right? So there are people who will see a net tax increase because of this bill. This is proof of how poorly designed the bill is, I'll say. But why the flat tax? The flat tax is being sold on this mythical idea that somehow it will lead to increased economic growth. However, as I've shown you, we've been cutting taxes for over 20 years in the state, and we've seen nothing for it. You know, we have the share of establishments relative to the rest of the nation is smaller. The share of jobs relative to the rest of the nation is smaller than it was 20 years ago. When depressions come, they hit harder. They last longer. Ohio has not seen the mythical economic growth that income tax are supposed to come, and it's not that surprising, because at the end of the day, we know that the richer you are, the less you spend in the state, right? And therefore, every dollar that we give to a very wealthy person has much less significance than the dollar that we give to a working class, low income household, to a family, to somebody who's actually established in Ohio. And that's why the work that we are all advocating for is so important.
Thank you for that. That is a great bottom line to end on, Guichet. And Will, thank you both, honestly, for coming and diving into what is very complicated, very complex policy, and making it comprehensive so that we can understand really, again, what that bottom line is for families and who we're fighting for. Just incredible and very important part of the conversation. I know that we talk a lot about enhanced funding and supporting these services that are so vital so that folks have what they need to live healthy lives. And we know that tax net revenue for these services is incredibly important. And it's a vital piece of the equation. So we thank you for diving into it with us today. As always, we will send around the recording of this conversation and slides at the end, just a little bit in a few hours from here. And then also would draw your attention to the chat, where Will has also provided additional resources and research from our friends at Policy Matters Ohio. We'll also be sure to send those around with our follow-up materials and make sure that they're available. Also wanted to give a bit of a heads up and a preview of our next budget webinar coming up on March 24th. We are excited to be joined by our friends at Disability Rights Ohio, as well as the Ohio Association of Area Agencies on Aging. That's a lot of A words, but they're fantastic, to talk about really home and community-based care. There's a lot of discussion around rates, around workforce in that area, particularly in the budget. So really excited to have two of our members come and discuss their changes and what they would like to see in the budget to make sure that workforce is supported, and that Ohioans who need those services, who may be best met with services in their homes, can access them, and it's available for all. Just one last announcement, just to give folks an update of where we are really in the budget process. It seems like we've been going full speed ahead for a while now. We know that hearings continue to happen in those finance subcommittees in the House. House Bill 1 is not part of the budget at the moment. So it is happening, and those discussions are happening in a different committees rather than the finance committees. Ways and Means, make sure you keep an eye on those as well. But we do expect the House is right now, they are drafting a lot of amendments to the state budget. So now is the time to talk to your elected officials about those changes that you would like to see, those additions. We do expect to see the first kind of round of changes from the House to come out mid-March, mid-April. We still have about another whole month of hearings before we'll see that first round of changes. There'll be about a week of discussion on those changes, and then another kind of omnibus big amendment to the budget before the House votes that bill out of committee and on the floor by the end of April. So we still have a number of weeks of public hearings, some opportunity to talk to lawmakers. Spring break is coming for lawmakers. They will get out of town for about 2 weeks. It might be difficult to reach in the beginning of April. So keep that in mind in your advocacy efforts. And we will be here, of course, with any questions that you have. Feel free to question or send concerns or, back to those questions to me or Sarah. And we will see you next time here on our budget webinar series on March 24th. Thanks again for your time and your attention this morning. Thanks again to Guichet and to Will, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.